Hello, hello! How is everyone doing this fine morning, or afternoon, wherever you may be? I hope this week has been kind to you as of yet. I have got good news and bad news. Bad news is, I have a hernia. I went in this morning to the general surgery area, blah blah blah. Had my private parts medically fondled by a man with the same name as me. Turns out it was, it is a hernia. It's super small. Not very, most hernias aren't very dangerous, but I don't need it to be fixed right away, so that's good. One of my regulars I learned the other day, who is roughly 85, give or take a decade, also has a hernia, so I've been bonding with him over that lately. Good news is, I got my hair permed, and it turned out so nice. I've got like shoulder length hair, and I've always just worn it in a bun for the most part because it's super flat and straight and not fun to be worn down, so I got it permanently curled and I love it. Yeah, so what? I'm 26 with permed hair and a hernia. This is what dreams are made of. Today I bring you Colorado's first serial killer. My name is Eli, and this is Murder in the Morning. My sources for today come heavily from a Steemit article, apnews.com, and the rest I will put down below. Colorado is no stranger to serial killers and other demented oddities. From Judy the Black Widow's poisonings of the 1970s, or Scott Lee Kimball, who murdered young girls while serving as an FBI informant. And then there's the oopsie whoopsies of when Ted Bundy escaped from prison in Glenwood Springs to go on and kill even more women. And most recently, the tragic story of the Watts family murders. Chris Watts taking the lives of his pregnant wife and 3 children. Oh, and don't even get me started on the JonBenet Ramsey case. That was in Boulder, Colorado. But before all of that, another gruesome character shook the city of Denver to its core. Quote, in the winter of 1900 and 1901, women in Denver, Colorado were terrorized by a very unusual serial killer. The victims were women walking the streets after dark, many of them returning from church or other worship services. Their attacker did not sexually assault or rob any of the women. He simply snuck up behind them on deserted streets and bashed in their heads with a very heavy object. End quote. Throughout the story, I want you to keep in mind that during this time, Denver was essentially experiencing an epidemic of muggings or street robberies. According to an editorial in the Colorado Springs Gazette, these street robberies were a, quote, devilment that has run riot in Denver from the time the police department transferred from police duties to herding up dive keepers and inmates who will vote next November for carving out the wishes of the present state and city administration, end quote. Mugging victims in Denver, the editorial suggested, no longer dare to complain to police. It feels like they essentially gave up. The police, that is. And again, this plays a large role in the investigation today. From August 1900 to February 1901, one man bludgeoned at least 10 different women in the neighborhood of Capitol Hill, Denver. Some would survive, while others did not. On August 24, 1900, 2 women were attacked. 28-year-old Elva Jessup was on her way home from a service at the nearby synagogue. She was attacked a few doors down from her home when a man burst out from a dark corner and hit her in the head with a pipe or a wooden club. Later that night, 45-year-old Lillian Bell was walking in an alley about 2 minutes away from the first attack occurred when she was struck, this time fatally. 1 month later, on September 24th, 23-year-old Emma Carlson, quote, was walking home from church in the evening when she heard something behind her. Turning, she caught a glimpse of the attacker as she was hit hard in the forehead by his club or pipe. She stumbled to a nearby house, was let inside, and relayed a description of her attacker before falling to the floor. She described the assailant as a small man with a very white complexion, end quote. These first 3 attacks and 1 murder went largely unnoticed by the police. They must have assumed these attacks were just like any other street robbery in the past years. Couldn't be bothered. However, if they had investigated, they would have learned that this assailant wasn't robbing or assaulting his victims. They were simply doing it to do it. On October 5th of 1900, 26-year-old Annie McCatty was attacked walking home roughly 23 blocks from the first 3 attacks. She would live, however, and this time the crime attracted much more attention. Annie's brother was a wealthy businessman who took his anger to the papers, causing quite an uproar within the media. Even further, he posted a $200 reward, which is almost $6,000 today, for information leading to the culprit. This also may have been the first instance in which the attacker had been frightened, possibly as a result of the press surrounding his 4th victim, or some other circumstance. Either way, he didn't attack anyone else for almost 2 months. It wasn't until December 22nd of 1900 that Mrs. Dreary Young was struck in the head walking home. She would have required medical attention, but luckily survived. Again, the police were left without leads. All of his victims are left essentially unconscious or dead after he attacks them, and they have no way of remembering who he was, what he looked like, or what he even hit them with. On January 6th of 1901, 46-year-old Julia Dorr was walking to work when she was bashed in the head and thrown into a pit at a nearby construction site. Again, she would live. In February of 1901, he really hit his stride. On February 16th, he attacked Marie Fraser. Fraser had left her hairdresser's and appeared at the doorstep of her parents' house, her face smeared with blood and dirt, coming in and out of consciousness. She could not remember where she had been or who had knocked her down. According to the Steemit article, that same night, another attack may have been averted. Miss Everett, age 16, was walking home from her job at a dressmaking shop when she noticed that a man was following her. She stopped to let him pass. He also stopped. She walked fast and then ran, and he ran. She turned, and he ran down another alley to cut her off, but she ducked into a house where she was taken in by the people there. Miss Everett provided the most detailed description yet of the attacker, if this was in fact the same attacker, which it seems like. Quote, Miss Everett described him, and later claimed to have seen the same man again, while walking down the street with her sister during the daytime. A news reporter summarized her description as follows. He was of medium height, with light skin and a large, drooping black mustache. His eyes were blue and wild. He wore a long gray ulster and a crush hat, end quote. An ulster is simply a large overcoat, while a crush hat is a soft, felt-like hat. Unfortunately, police couldn't narrow down their suspect list as almost every man in the city owned what she was describing, an overcoat and a hat. 6 days later, on February 22nd, 3 women were attacked within the span of 1 hour. Marie Short, who was 40, was found unconscious in a vacant parking lot and died later of a skull fracture. Emma Johnson, who was 30, was on her way home from church when she was attacked. She worked as a servant for a doctor who thankfully lived nearby, and she managed to stumble into his house. Of the 3 attacks that night, she was the only victim who would survive. Not far from the last attack, 36-year-old Josephine Unterneher was hit hard behind her right ear, where she suffered a long gash that required surgery. She was able to describe her attacker, who had chased her before catching her, and she described him as having a medium-sized build with a large mustache, and he wore a black crush hat pushed far back on his head. A few days later, she would die from her injuries. 3 people were now dead due to this maniac running around and smacking people upside the head from behind. No robbery, no assault, just pure violence. Quote, 3 days later, the police went on a huge sweep of the neighborhood. They conducted a mass arrest of laborers, street people, boarding house residents, and just about anyone they could find on the fringe of society. They detained many of these usual suspects for an extended period of time without charges, end quote. One man arrested that day was Al Cohen, no more a suspect than anyone else taken in on that day. Police reports from that afternoon say that Al Cohen was arrested at a boarding house roughly a mile away from the crimes, and that he owned only one suit, which did not match the eyewitness accounts. However, according to the Steemit article, the next day, a man named Albert Frederick came into the police surgeon's clinic to have the dressing changed on a wound. While he waited in the doctor's office, another man was there, and he was reading aloud from the newspaper. Once the man had finished reading the part of the article that said there was now an additional $500 being added to the reward for information leading to this attacker, Frederick announced that he had witnessed one of the attacks. In fact, he had gotten a close-up view of the criminal. Frederick's story was that he was walking near where Mary Short was attacked. He had passed a woman on the street, and shortly thereafter, he heard her exclaim, "Oh!" As Frederick turned around, the attacker ran toward him and passed him on the street, brushing his coat against Frederick as he went by. Frederick then became scared and left the scene, worried that it was not safe to be there. Apparently, that is why he had not gone back to the victim to offer her any help, nor had he reported the crime or her injury to anyone. Suspicious. The doctor asked Frederick to relay his story to the police, and after questioning him, they took Frederick to the general lockup that held at least 15 men who had been arrested the day before. Frederick pointed to Al Cohen. That was the Capitol Hill killer. After this crazy turn of events, Cohen was immediately interrogated. Alone. The lead detective, Captain Armstrong, conducted his interview and afterward told the media this. Quote, Cohen had been arrested on the street carrying a revolver, some cartridges, and an iron bar about a foot in length, although multiple sources say that he'd been arrested at his boarding house a mile away. According to Armstrong, Cohen had told them in their, again, one-on-one questioning that he hated women and felt persecuted by them. Quote, he does not talk coherently and appears to be mentally unbalanced, added Captain Armstrong. Plus, he fit the general witness description of the attacker, minus the clothes, since Owen's one suit was no match for those descriptions. End quote. However, many people had issues with Captain Armstrong's statements. Multiple times before, he had been certain that they had caught their suspect, and multiple times before, he had been wrong. Plus, the clothes didn't match. There was a discrepancy with the weapon. Was it a metal pipe or a wooden club? And why did he have a gun on him? Furthermore, numerous residents of Cohen's boarding house said that he had been there the night of multiple murders. There was no usable evidence uncovered at the boarding house, and the chief witness, Frederick, turned out to be a drug addict. But still, Armstrong stuck to his story. According to the Steemit article, Cohen was put on trial for killing Mary Short. However, most of the police department's evidence related to the murder of Josephine Unterneher. When the prosecution tried to use it, the judge ruled the evidence inadmissible. The trial was a disaster. They had so little to go on that the prosecution's case was meager and subject to plenty of doubt. The defense got the upper hand and turned the focus towards the prosecution's chief eyewitness, Frederick, as its straw man. Maybe he had committed the murder. He was at least as good a suspect as Cohen. Long story short, no one was convicted, and Al Cohen walked. There was one more attack that fit the profile on June 25th of 1901, when a Mrs. Coleman was struck in the head with a pipe at a gas station. But past that, the attack stopped. Whoever the killer was had moved on or been arrested for other offenses. Denver police and the entire world would soon forget about this case. Sadly, I probably will too in due time. And that is where the story ends. So frustrating, I know. I hate having a ending like that with no real answers. But it was interesting, right? And that, my friends, is the story of the Capitol Hill killer. As always, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate all of you out there. Please don't hate me for saying this. But if you did enjoy the episode, I would love for you to leave an honest review or rating. It helps heaps. Sorry, I hate asking. If you'd like, stick around for a bit shorter bonus story after the music. Okie dokie. Bye-bye. Hello again. I appreciate y'all sticking around. This isn't a murder story, but it may as well be. I mean, I guess it kind of is. Titled Army Whistleblower Who Exposed Alleged Australian War Crimes in Afghanistan is Sentenced to Prison by Rod McGourick. Quote, an Australian judge sentenced a former Army lawyer to almost 6 years in prison on Tuesday for leaking to the media classified information that exposed allegations of Australian war crimes in Afghanistan. David McBride, who is 60, was sentenced in a court in the capital of Canberra, I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong, to 5 years and 8 months in prison after pleading guilty to 3 charges, including theft and sharing with members of the press documents classified as secret. He had faced a potential life sentence. Justice David Mossop ordered McBride to serve 27 months in prison before he can be considered for release on parole. Rights advocates argue that McBride's conviction and sentencing before any alleged war criminal he helped expose reflected a lack of whistleblower protections in Australia. McBride addressed his supporters as he walked his dog to the front door of the Australian Capital Territory Supreme Court to be sentenced. McBride told a cheering crowd, I've never been so proud to be an Australian as I am today. I may have broken the law, but I did not break my oath to the people of Australia and the soldiers that keep us safe. A lawyer for McBride, Mark Davis, said that his legal team would appeal a ruling that prevented McBride from mounting a defense. Judge Mossop ruled in November last year that McBride had no duty as an Army officer beyond following orders. Mark Davis said, we know that the Australian military teaches a much broader notion of what the duty of an officer is in a battlefield than to follow orders. Davis said that the severity of the sentence also created grounds for an appeal, but their effort would focus on the earlier ruling. McBride's documents formed the basis of an Australian Broadcasting Corporation 7-part TV series in 2017 that contained war crime allegations, including Australian Special Air Service Regiment soldiers killing unarmed Afghan men and children in 2013. In sentencing, Mossop said that he did not accept McBride's explanation that he thought a court would vindicate him for acting in the public interest. McBride's argument that his suspicions that the higher echelons of the Australian Defence Force were engaged in criminal activity obliged him to disclose classified papers, quote, didn't reflect reality, said Judge Mossop. An Australian military report released in 2020 found evidence that Australian troops unlawfully killed 39 Afghan prisoners, farmers, and civilians. The report recommended 19 current and former soldiers face criminal investigation. Police are working with the Office of the Special Investigator, an Australian investigation agency established in 2021, to build cases against elite SAS and Commando Regiment troops who served in Afghanistan between 2005 and 2016. Former SAS trooper Oliver Scholes last year became the first of these veterans to be charged with a war crime. He is accused of shooting dead a non-combatant man in a wheat field in an Uruzgan province in 2012. Also last year, a civil court found Australia's most decorated living war veteran, Ben Robert Smith, had likely and unlawfully killed 4 Afghans. He has not been criminally charged. Human Rights Watch Australia director Daniela Gafshin said that McBride's sentencing was evidence that Australia's whistleblowing laws needed exemptions in the public interest. She said in a statement, "It is a stain on Australia's reputation that some of its soldiers have been accused of war crimes in Afghanistan, and yet the first person convicted in relation to those crimes is a whistleblower, not the abusers." She adds, David McBride's jail sentence reinforces that whistleblowers are not protected by Australian law. It will create a chilling effect on those taking risks to push for transparency and accountability, the cornerstones of democracy. On Tuesday, some lawmakers from minor parties and independents raised McBride's sentencing in Parliament. Greens lawmaker Elizabeth Watson Brown told Prime Minister Anthony Albanese that McBride had been imprisoned for the, quote, crime of telling the truth about war crimes. Why won't your government admit that our whistleblower laws are broken and commit to urgent reform to keep whistleblowers like Mr. McBride safe and out of jail? Watson Brown added to the Prime Minister. Albanese declined to answer, saying it might prejudice McBride's appeal. I'm not going to say anything here that interferes with a matter that is quite clearly going to continue to be before the courts, Albanese told Parliament. Andrew Wilkie, a former government intelligence analyst whistleblower who's now an independent lawmaker, said Australian governments, quote, hate whistleblowers. The government wanted to punish David McBride and to send a signal to other insiders to stay on the inside and to stay silent, said Wilkie, end quote. Woo! Some heavy stuff right there. Whistleblowers are not having an easy go of it right now, that's for sure. Boeing. I hope his case continues to draw attention towards whistleblowers and war crimes alike. A very courageous man, to say the least. Welp, I think that'll about do it for me today, folks. Thank you again for sticking around. I really do appreciate it, and I hope y'all have a great rest of your day. Okie dokie. Bye-bye. Love you.